Thank you to Corey and the team. Hey, let's start with prayer right now. Jesus, it seems to have been your assumption, normal assumption, that when you would walk into the room, or you'd come to a place and you would encounter, did it turn off? And it would encounter people. You just assumed that they had hearts that were hard, they had eyes that were not seeing, they had ears that were stopped up. And I just pray right now you do some work in us to open our ears, to hear things that we need to hear. Open our eyes so that we can see things maybe from a perspective we've not seen. Give us hearts that are receptive, even if we don't like what it is we're hearing, or we're just confused by it. We just pray this in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen? Thank you, GCR. Thank you, Corey, for playing worship. I know it's probably a little awkward to kind of come in with a whole group of people you don't even know and just dive right in. Alan, you said you respect church planters. I just want you to know, as far as we're concerned, you guys are honorary church planters, because you're taking an established church and taking it in a new direction. And you have certainly helped us, and you're doing what every one of our church plants says they want to do, is they're helping plant daughter churches, helping seed new churches. I don't know if you guys know it, but they were having services in this very room. This was their room for services for the last 9 months. They got into their new sanctuary last week. So that's what church plants do. And you just have to do it. Planting a church really is no different than working in an established church. You just have to keep doing it. So thank you to everybody. Hey, this is adult learning. There's coffee and stuff out there. You can bring that in here. If you need to use the restroom, feel free to get up and move around. If you see any of the GCR folk, we are eating up their time. I see the executive minister, the media minister, the worship minister, and the senior minister in the room right now. And I understand we're going to have GCR leaders, elders and others joining us throughout the time. So don't leave them alone. Pester them. If they come in, pester them. Find ways to interact with them and meet them. But this is adult learning. Bathrooms are right outside. If you're like me, I can't sit for very long. At some point, I'm going to be standing up and walking around. I pay better attention walking around than I do sitting down. So this is adult learning. You can move around like that. So please feel free to do that. The other thing I would just say is, if we could, everybody look at Brent. Wave your hand, Brent. Everybody repeat after me. Hey, Brent. Hey, Brent. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. You don't look a day over 29. Say it. You don't look a day over 29. Everybody just roll your eyes now. So, okay. Hey, listen, we're here because what we need is a sufficient spirituality. Most of us need a way of being that can work in the moment of need. We need a sufficient spirituality, or maybe we should say an adequate spirituality. So there are days I'd settle for adequate. There are days I don't have adequate. I have an inadequate spirituality. There are times when I find myself wanting a competent spirituality or a capable spirituality. I want one that's useful and working. I want one that's up to snuff, you might say. It gets things done. Eugene Peterson points us toward the fact that we all have a perpetual need, an ongoing need to find a spirituality that's adequate to our momentary challenge. And that's why we have these gatherings, these ThinkNEXT gatherings. We talk about pragmatic things. We also talk about spiritual things. And sometimes I think we go both ways. And I think this is going to be one of those that you're going to walk away with things that are pragmatic and helpful and nuts and bolts. And there's going to also, I really truly believe, going to be some moments the Spirit might speak and you're going to hear something you needed to hear, because we need a way of being human that incorporates the spirituality of us, but also incorporates the physicality of us, so that we can figure out how to do what we're supposed to do when the time comes to do it. But we have to have that, and the challenge is, it doesn't necessarily just come, because we all face challenges. We all face moments that push us to the edge of our sufficient spirituality, and we find out it's now insufficient. We need to get sufficient back. And you can think of biblical stories. Peter found himself denying Christ. He didn't have a sufficient spirituality at the moment. Peter. Not only Peter, Abraham distrusted God. Noah had a sufficient one, but there were times after that maybe he didn't. Jacob feared retribution from his brother. His spirituality was at risk. David faced Goliath. He had sufficient spirituality for the moment. I've gone through my own moments in my own life, and I look around the room and I see people who have sufficient spirituality, but I'm sure you have moments you wonder. Chris moving to Winfield and starting a church from scratch. You guys moving not too far, but starting a church while keeping your job there in up near Glacier National Park. You know, Tim and Melinda starting their church back in 2005 and now handing it off to Misha and Oksana. And we'll introduce you guys later, but we're glad you're here. The Rogers moving to Ardmore. I remember when you called me and you guys had left assessment and called and said, well, we know where we're supposed to go. You drove into town and you just felt the call. we need that sufficient spirituality that keeps us there. Robbie, so many things I could say. I mean, I can keep going around the room. Brent, being 29 years old and looking like this. I mean, it's an amazing thing. We have need of a sufficient spirituality, but all of us have moments when the real me shows up. And that's where Mark chapter 4 comes in and helps us, I think. It's a lifesaver. Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter some seed on the ground. He goes to sleep and he rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows. And you guys know what I'm going to read here. He knows not how." The kingdom grows because the kingdom has the growth element in it. It just grows on its own. And we've invited Bob Russell, who has grown a church, as I understand it, from about 100 when you got there to somewhere north of 30,000. And he's not here because he knows how it grew. We confirmed that this morning. He's here because he knows how to cast seed. He's seen God do amazing things. He's seen some stuff, but we didn't invite him because he's here because he knows how it worked. He just is here because he knows who to look to. And so we're going to ask Bob to kind of give us direction and guidance. We're thankful that you can come and be with us. Let me pray one more time for you, and we'll hand this off to you. So, Father God, bless Bob with the words that we need to hear. Bless us with the ears, the eyes, the heart that's receptive. Speak to us in many ways. Speak to us through Bob, and even speak to us directly. Just whisper the things we need to hear. We need to hear right now. Build in us a spirituality that's sufficient for the days that are ahead. We pray in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Phil. When I was in the 7th grade, my parents decided that they would start a new church in the little town where we lived. We've been traveling 15 miles to a church of about 180 people. And so we started a new church of 30 people, about 35 people in Conneautville, Pennsylvania. They bought a house and knocked out the wall between the living room and the dining room, and we started a new church. And I got to tell you, I hated it. There was not anything about it that I liked. My parents had always told me that I should date girls in the church. There's only one teenage girl in the church, and she jilted me. And there was no one else available to me in church. But it was awkward, and I didn't like it. So unlike Alan, I've never envied people who start churches. I admire you. I respect you. I hope I can encourage you. But I don't envy you. Your work is important, all important, but it is difficult. How many of you know the name Joe Rex Kearns? One person. How many of you heard of Bob Russell before you came in here today? A lot of you. Let me tell you about Joe Rex Kearns. Joe Rex Kearns was the first preacher at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He helped start the church in 1962, and they started meeting in a school. I came 3 years later. Joe Rex Kearns resigned, and there were a little over 100 people. They were meeting in the basement of a house. But I can't tell you I started the church. The groundwork had already been laid. I was reaping a harvest where others had sown seed. And I'm like the guy who was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. I just had so many good things happen. It was a garden spot, and some great things happened there. But it wouldn't have been possible without Joe Rex Kearns. And Joe Rex Kearns may not be known by many of you, but I guarantee he's known in heaven. And his name is revered among the founders of Southeast Christian Church. And who knows how many people have been won to Christ over the last 60 years because Joe Rex Kearns was a church planter and got in there and plugged along and did it right. So I respect what you do, and I hope that what we talk about will be a benefit to you. I want to begin by talking with you about leadership lessons I've learned from mistakes that I've made. About 40 years ago, a 5th grade Sunday school teacher in our church asked her Sunday school class to write an encouraging note to the preacher. I have kept this note from Kenny Ward for about 45 years. You can't see it, I know, but it says, "To Bob Russell," misspelled my name, only one L. And on the front, he's got this platform with a guy standing in front of a microphone with his hair standing straight up, stick figure. On the inside, Kenny wrote, "Dear Mr. Russell, you have to be brave to be able to stand in front of thousands of people. I'm glad you're a preacher at this church, and I think you do a wonderful job. I'm praying that one of these times you don't mess up. Sincerely, Kenny Ward." You know what I think? I think Kenny Ward had been listening to his parents on the way home from church. I think they had come to church and they were talking about, we really like this church, but it is big and so many mega church preachers mess up. I hope this preacher doesn't mess up. So Kenny Ward wrote me and said, hope you don't mess up. Well, if I had my life to live over again, there are a lot of things that I would do the very same way. I would choose to enter ministry in April of my senior year in high school. I would go to Cincinnati Bible College. I would meet Judy K. Thomas and marry her. I would take Southeast Christian Church in 1966 when it was meeting in the basement of a house. I would stay for 40 years. I would retire and do mentoring groups and travel and speak. I think I've done some things the way God would have me to do them. But I got to tell you, I've also messed up a lot along the way. I'm thankful that there's no major scandal attributed to my name, but I sure made a lot of mistakes, and some of them are very serious mistakes. And I learned some lessons from those. Sometimes you learn your best lessons from your worst mistakes. Remember that old thing about experience is a hard teacher. She gives the test first and the lesson afterward. That's true in a marriage, isn't it? I hadn't been married very long. I am a morning person. I wake up at 6 o'clock this morning. I woke up at 4 o'clock to get here, but I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I feel great. My wife is a night person, and she is a whole different personality until about 10:30 in the morning. But one morning, I woke up and went out to get the newspaper, and 6 inches of unpredicted snow had fallen during the night, and the sun was glistening off this snow, clinging to trees, and it was a spectacular, invigorating sight. And I thought, it is a shame my wife is missing this. She needs to see this. And I reached down, and it was packing snow, and I made a snowball, and I went upstairs and laid back down in bed and reached over and put that snowball on my wife's stomach. I will never do that again. It is the only time in 58 years of marriage that she has hit me. And she meant it, too. I mean, we learn our best lessons sometimes from our worst mistakes. It's a wise person who learns from mistakes. It is a wiser person who learns from the mistakes of others. In the book of 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, the Apostle Paul documents the wilderness wanderings of the Israelites and then how many of them griped and complained and were disciplined by it. And he says in verse 11, 1 Corinthians 10, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come, so that you who think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. He said, learn from the lessons and the mistakes of the Israelites so that you don't fall. So I'm going to focus in this first session on some leadership lessons I learned from mistakes that I made in hopes that they'll benefit you in whatever role you play in church leadership. The first lesson I learned was to confront disagreement when necessary. To confront disagreement when necessary. One of the first mistakes I made as a young leader was a failure to confront. Maybe it's because I'm naive and I believe that all problems will eventually take care of themselves if you just don't do anything about them. Maybe it's because my training in Bible college and leadership was insufficient. I remember a practical ministries course I took, and it consisted of how to have a pictorial directory and how to run a vacation Bible school. And it had very little to do with leadership of a staff and leadership in the church. But one of the first mistakes I made almost split our church and resulted in a breach of friendships. Let me tell you about it. Our church grew after over a few years to about 200 people. And the elders began to talk about, we need a youth minister. This is back when multi-staffs were just coming into vogue. And I said, I've got just the person for this job. He was a friend of mine from school. He's a year older than I, and he's got a youth ministry in Georgia, and he's having some struggles. I think he's movable. Well, those ought to be 3 strikes against you. Friend, you're older, and it's not going well. We interviewed the guy, and he's a charmer. He was fun to be with, and the elders liked him. We hired him. But I found out after he was with us for a little bit, that his philosophy of youth ministry was vastly different than my philosophy. He wanted, through transactional analysis, to get a handful of kids around him and kind of deepen them, and I wanted him to have a broader appeal. But rather than me confronting him and sitting down man to man and saying, hey, we've got a difference of vision for this youth ministry, I didn't want to alienate him. I wanted to be a people pleaser. I didn't want to lose a friend, so I'd tiptoe around the edges. In elders' meetings, after a couple of years, the elders began to say, this youth ministry isn't going very well. We may have to ask this guy to resign. And I say, oh no, don't ask him to resign. It'll get better, but it didn't get better. Finally, one day, I read an announcement that he had prepared to put in our church newsletter announcing a teen all-nighter. The teenagers still have those all-nighters. That'll get you out of the youth ministry faster than anything. They're going to have a teen all-nighter, and he was going to promote it as with the headline, a teenage love-in. Well, I thought in light of the hippie culture that day and in light of the lack of respect that some of our parents had for him, that was not going to cut it. So, you know how you get irritated and it finally builds up and there's the straw that broke the camel's back? I marched into his office and I say, I think you need to get another title for this activity. He had sensed the distancing in our relationship. He dug his heels in and he said, I think I know how to lead teenagers. That's what we're going to call it. Now, I got insubordination. And so I dumped too much, too late, too loud, and it doesn't go anywhere. And finally I say to him, don't you understand this is the kind of thing that can get you fired? And marched out, which is a violation of Leadership 101. Well, he asked to be on the agenda of our next elders meeting. And in the elders meeting, he told the elders, I think you guys need to know, I believe that Bob Russell's trying to get me fired. They said, well, that's interesting. We've been trying to get you fired for the last 6 months, and we've not been able to do it yet. And all 7 of the elders said, look, this is not going well. We think you need to step down. He said, I'm not stepping down. That's not what is best for this congregation. That's not what these kids want. I'm not resigning. And he marched out. Well, that week he wrote a letter to everyone on our mailing list saying, I've had a disagreement with Bob Russell and the elder. They've asked me to resign. I don't think that's what you want me to do. I'm not going to burden you with all the details in this letter. But this Sunday, my wife and I will be standing outside the church building, and we got a 10-page document showing you the problem. Well, our congregation was stunned. They thought things were going well. They didn't know there was a disagreement on staff. And there they were next Sunday passing out this 10-page document, quoting me and the elders, misquoting us, putting us in the worst possible light. And I was so angry with him. He's trying to split our church. He taught a Sunday school class. They met in his home, about 20 people. Then they'd march to church and sit on the first 2 rows and fold their arms and scowl at me when I preached. And that was my baptism of fire into ministry. I almost wanted to start a new church at that point. I came home one night during this trauma, and there were 3 elders from a church in Cincinnati, about 90 miles up the road, and they said, they didn't know our problem, but they said, Bob, our preacher has just retired, and we're here to hire you. I went to our elders, and I said, I know I'm at the center of this conflict, but I've got an opportunity to go elsewhere that is kind of appealing, and if you think it'd be best for me to resign, best for the church, I'm willing to resign right now. And all 7 of the elders said, no, we want you to stay. We're going to work through this problem. We're going to overcome it. 2 nights later, I came home, and there was my first ever color television set in my family room. And there's a note on it that said, this is a gift from the elders. We're not trying to bribe you, but we want you to know we love you, and we hope you'll stay. Well, they bribed me into staying, and I worked through that problem. And I was so glad that I did, because though our church stagnated for a period, didn't grow, we overcame that, and then we began to grow again. Now, I point that out to you for several reasons. One is to show you that every church has problems. You look at a place like Southeast Christian Church from a 5,000 feet level, you don't know all the problems that we had to go through to get where we are. So don't panic whenever everything doesn't go smoothly. Another reason I point that out is to help you know When you have unity at the core, you can go through a lot. It's when there's disharmony at the core that you're in trouble. But when you have you as a leader and the elders of your church or the board that oversees you, and you're all on the same page, you all have the same vision, then you can overcome the problems fairly easy if you're all on the same page. But the primary reason I point that out is to underscore the fact, the need to confront when necessary. I was so angry at this guy for a long time, thinking he tried to split our church. But the longer I got away from that, the more I understood it really wasn't his problem. The primary source of the problem was me. I was the leader, and I failed to confront as I should have confronted. So I tell you, I became a different leader because of that experience. I learned the importance of having weekly staff meetings in which discussion of issues was easier. Somebody said you keep your accounts current. You don't let them build up. I learned the importance of regular evaluations in which input and tough questions were expected. I learned to wait a day or two before confronting, because if I confront in anger, I exaggerate the problem and wind up apologizing for overstating the problem rather than getting to the core. You do that in a marriage all the time. You know, you get irritated and you get angry, and then you come back and say, I'm sorry, I got angry, but you never really get to the core of the problem. So I learned I have to wait before I confront. I also learned that you don't have to confront everything. As a leader, you have to be discerning to know what needs to be confronted and what doesn't need to be confronted. A mentor of mine, John Wilson, once said, if you got a problem, you got to decide whether you got measles or whether you got a malignancy. If it's measles, you just wait. It'll take care of itself. If it's a malignancy, the sooner you confront it, the better. But that takes discernment on the part of a leader. I also learned that encouragement means a whole lot more if you're willing to counter that with confrontation. If somebody comes to you, and you're a preacher, you teach class, somebody comes every Sunday, they say, good job, good sermon, good sermon. Eventually, it doesn't mean anything at all. But if a person once in a while comes to you and says, you know, you said something this morning I'm not sure I agreed with. Let's talk about it. Then for several weeks later you say, boy, you said something that day that really helped me. That encouragement means more because you know at least they're trying to be truthful with you. I also learned that confrontation doesn't take nearly as much time and energy as we think. You may know the name of Patrick Lencioni, who is a business consultant, author of a number of books, The 5 Temptations of the CEO and some others. We had him at our church for a Christian businessman's conference. And he told about consulting with a particular business. And as he was talking with the support staff and the people on the ground floor, everybody had the same concern. There was a guy named Fred who was a vice president who had been spreading the rumor that he had been selected to be the next CEO. And nobody had confidence in Fred to do it. And the CEO was pretty old. So on his final day there, Lencioni met with the CEO, and he said, do you know what Fred's been telling people? CEO, yeah, I know what Fred's been telling people. He's been telling people I've tagged him as my successor. But that's not the truth. Fred couldn't do it. Lencioni said, what are you going to do about it? He said, oh, I don't have time and energy for that kind of silliness. He said, time and energy, how much time and energy would it take? Pick up the phone and say, Fred, this is the boss. I understand you've been telling people I've selected you as the next CEO. That better stop or something bad's going to happen to you. Have a good day. How long would that take? Not very long. But why don't we do that? Why don't we confront issues? We say we don't confront people because we don't want to hurt their feelings. The real reason we don't confront is we don't want to be hurt. We're people pleasers, and we're scared to death that somebody's going to disapprove of us. I really think that 85, 90% of the problems we have in church could be resolved if we just practice what Jesus told us in Matthew 18. If you have something against your brother, do what? Go to him personally. Work it out between the two of you. If he listens to you, you've won your brother over. But if not, then you tell it to two, take 2 or 3 others along and confront. Then tell it to the whole church. But we don't do that because we have a weakness and we're afraid to confront. I learned to confront when necessary. Here's the second lesson I learned. I learned to acknowledge my weaknesses and delegate accordingly. I learned to acknowledge my weaknesses and delegate accordingly. I'd like for every woman in this room to close your ears right now, because I'm going to make a confession that is going to make you angry at me. The worst mistake I ever made in ministry is I forgot a wedding. Look, when somebody confesses a fault, you're supposed to say, oh, I understand. That could happen to anybody. No, oh, God. I've never confessed that and had a preacher come up and say, I'll tell you, I did something worse than that. No, they always say, oh, how in the world? How in the world? But I did. And I had a lot of excuses about why I forgot a wedding. I had two weddings on the same day, and the rehearsal for this wedding had been on a Thursday night rather than the day before, and it was on Saturday, the day that my secretary wasn't in, and a lot of excuses. But the bottom line is I forgot this all-important date on the calendar of this couple. On Saturday morning, I woke up and I said to my wife, I think don't have anything today until that wedding tonight. I'm going to take my two sons and we're going to go to the neighbor's Little League baseball game. This is before cell phones. And I take off. She doesn't know where I am. We go to the Little League baseball game. I come strolling back into the house about 1:30. My wife meets me in a panic at the door, and she said, Bob, did you forget you had a wedding today at 1 o'clock? Oh, my heart sank. She said, well, they got an associate minister to do it. Well, it was actually our church janitor, an old man who had a ministerial degree in his background. Don't laugh. It couldn't be. I just felt awful. And so I said, I've got to go apologize. Remember that old saying about if you got a frog to swallow, don't look at it very long, get it over with. So I got in the car and I headed up to church. I figured they were taking pictures. Now, it's a 10-minute drive from my house to the church building. And I am a minister of the gospel of Christ. But you won't believe the lies that came to my mind in that 10-minute. I had a flat tire. I got stopped by a stalled train. I saw a vision of a 50-foot high Jesus, and I was in a trance. I walked in the sanctuary. I thought the couple would be up getting pictures. The whole family was up on the platform getting their pictures taken. And the bride saw me as soon as I walked in. Oh, Brother Bob, we're so thankful you're all right. We were afraid you were in an accident or something. What happened? It took every ounce of energy I had to say to that woman, I am so sorry. I forgot. Would you please forgive me? Now, to their credit, they did, which means they didn't shoot me. But I'm telling you, that was maybe the lowest point in my ministry. I said to myself, I don't belong in ministry. I am such a goof off. I can't even administrate my own schedule. I should just quit. And I realized I have got to do something. Folks, that year I did 32 weddings. 32 weddings. That's a pitiful example of a people pleaser out of control. Somebody who can't say no. Don't hurt anybody. So on Monday, I walked into my secretary's office and I took my calendar and I dropped it in her lap. And I said, I am in trouble. From now on, I want you to run my life. Here's the schedule of when I will see people. If somebody asks me on Sunday or in the hallway, can they have an appointment with me? I'd say, I'd love to see you, but my secretary runs my life. Talk to my secretary. Well, she said, you're seeing too many people. We're going to cut that down. Then I said, look, next year I'm just going to do 15 weddings. First come, first serve. Delegate it out to other people, and I'll just do 15 weddings. And then we formed a committee who would evaluate the request that I had to go to this meeting or this class or whatever, and they would make decisions for me about where I would be. My secretary on Friday night would call my wife and tell me if I had activities on Saturday. On Saturday when I'm shaving, there's a Post-it note on the mirror saying, here's what you're supposed to do today. Now, you're sitting there thinking, how in the world could God trust a church of thousands to such a goof-off like that? I'm telling you, that's why. There came a time when I had to move from being a pastor, a chaplain, to being a preacher and eventually CEO. And if I didn't make those changes, I wasn't going to survive. There's an old saying, if uncontrolled, work will flow to the competent person until he submerges. And if you don't learn to delegate, and you stay one place very long, you're going to have more and more people coming to you because you work hard and you get things done, and pretty soon you're going to submerge. And that'll have all kind of expressions of how that comes out. But I'm telling you, we have to learn to delegate. Now, this is not easy. About a year later, I'm walking through the sanctuary on Saturday morning, and the custodian's setting up for a wedding. And I said, "You got a wedding tonight?" "Yeah." And I asked, "Who's getting married?" And when he told me who was getting married, my heart sank again, because it was a daughter of a family I'm very close to. So on Monday, I went to the secretary. I said, "Look, I said just 15 weddings. But when somebody like that asks for me, make an exception." She said, "They didn't ask for you." Now, that's easy for you to smile. But if you're a leader, you know what that feels like. All of a sudden, you're not needed. You're not the most important person. And one of the reasons we have a hard time delegating is because it hurts our ego. We want to be the point person in everything. We want everything to go through us. We want it to be done our way. And as a result, everything gets channeled through us and gets clogged. So I'm challenging you, delegate even if it hurts your ego. You got to swallow your pride. Delegate in the area of your weakness and stay in the area of your strength. My strength is not marriage counseling. My strength is preaching. And I would be wrong to sacrifice study time for the preaching because I've got to do marriage counseling. I've got to say, okay, I'm going to delegate that out to somebody. Delegate and don't micromanage. Here's the tough thing. To be able to find capable people, turn it over to them, give them some parameters, and let them go. And let me tell you what, they're going to do a whole lot more effective job if you're not hovering over them. They're going to be more creative. They're going to be more energetic if they own the program, that they're just doing it to please you. And delegate to gifted people, and then you make them look good. When Johnny Carson died, they interviewed a lot of people who had been on The Tonight Show, and they asked him why they liked going on The Tonight Show. And they all said the same thing. Johnny Carson had a way of questioning you, taking the spotlight off of himself and putting it on you. He had a way of making you look good. And that's your job as a leader, is that you find people who are capable, volunteers in your church, staff people, volunteers in the community, and you give them parameters, and then you make them look good. And as a result, God can bless the whole thing. Now, I think this is one of the reasons that a lot of churches don't grow much larger than 100 people or 120 people. If you're a really you're a hardworking preacher, you can be the personal chaplain to 120, 150 people, and everything circles around you. But if it's going to go to the next stage, then there's got to be a willingness to delegate and step aside. It's like Jethro coming to Moses out of the wilderness, and Moses was counseling people from morning to dusk. And Jethro asked, "What are you doing here? And what you're doing is not effective. These people aren't getting good counsel. You appoint some others to judge, others to be the counselors, and you just have the major problems that come to you. And then the people will get better counsel." The Apostle Paul said God gave some to be apostles, some to be pastors, some to be teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ will be built up. And those of you who are church planters, you cannot be effective over a period of time if you see your church as a pyramid with one guy at the top meeting everybody's needs. You got to picture it as a circle where you're training the people in this circle to minister to others. That makes them happier, more fulfilled, more committed, and it makes the church unlimited in what it can grow to be. Now, there are some challenges of that. One is you have to find capable people to do the job. And it's a lot easier sometimes just to do it yourself. But you got to find gifted, committed, reliable people. And then you have to be willing to relinquish responsibility, to step aside and let other people do it. They may do it better than you. It may not be quite as well as you would do it or the same way you would do it, but you let it go because it's not all about you. And then you secure the total support of the lay leaders. Here's the most difficult thing. Is everybody, I talked about it, your elders and you being on the same page. When you delegate, they may see that as a weakness. I came to our elders, and I'm really, really thankful for great elders from the time, I'll talk about that tomorrow. And And I said to the elders, look, it looks like things are going well in our church. I'm thankful. But I'm going to be real honest with you. I'm not doing very good. I'm kind of getting burned out. And there are a lot of things I'm not getting done, and I need help. Now, they could say, well, you're finding out what it's like to work more than one day a week, huh? You know, we have jobs too, a lot of pressure. Everybody's got pressure. They didn't. They said, Bob's telling us the truth. Let's help him. So they began to ask me how I spent my time. And they said to me, well, you're spending 5-6 hours a week marriage counseling, and you're not very good at it, frankly. Let's quit doing marriage counseling. And the best word I ever learned in ministry is the word referral. It's a great word, referral. I'm sorry, the elders have asked me not to do marital counseling. I want to refer you to somebody I have confidence in. And I got out of marriage counseling. They said, look, you're preaching quite a bit on Sunday night. We used to have Sunday night service. Said, you get the associates to do that. And then they asked me, how often do you go to the hospital? I said, well, a lot of people in the hospital, I go 3 times a week. They said, from now on, you just go to the hospital to people who are terminally ill. We'll recruit people in the church who have mercy gifts, and we'll go ourselves. We'll see that somebody goes to the hospital to visit people in the hospital every day. They'll pray with them. They'll really care. You just go to people who are terminally ill. So I announced to the church. I said, the elders have asked me only to go to people who are terminally ill. So if you're in the hospital, you don't want to see me coming. Because I'm just the Grim Reaper coming in there. You don't want to see me come. But there will be somebody who will visit you every day. Because the church is not a pyramid with one guy at the top, many. It's a circle where we're ministering to each other. Now, that works well for a while, except several months later, Mrs. Langley comes to one of the elders and she said, I was in the hospital for 6 days and Brother Russell never came to visit me. Now, what does that elder do? Instinctively, he was, oh, Mrs. Langley, I'm sorry. That's not like Brother Bob. He really cares for people. I'll talk to him about it. Okay. Then he comes to me between services. Brother Bob, Mrs. Langley's in the hospital, and she's a little upset you didn't visit her. Here's her phone. I think if you just give her a phone call, it'll be okay. Now, I got to get up and preach with that on my mind the next hour. That's not what that elder's supposed to do. The elder's supposed to say, Miss Langley, remember we said the church wasn't a pyramid, it's a circle? Did somebody come to visit you every day? Yes, they did. Were you terminally ill? Looks like you're not. You're back here today. Sit down and shut up. That's the kind of thing we need out of the elder. But if you've got that kind of unity at the core, backing up, then you can delegate. Without that, it becomes really, really difficult. Okay, here's the third lesson I learned from, what time am I supposed to quit, Phil? Okay. We'll hustle a little bit. I learned to give my family priority even when the church needed attention. When I came to Southeast Christian Church in Louisville as a 22-year-old child, I knew I was in way over my head. I grew up in the country, this church is in the city. I had a BA degree from a Bible college. This church had a lot of people with doctorates. I grew up in a church of, I told you, 35 people. This church already had 120, and they had the potential to grow large. I knew if I was going to make it here, I was going to have to really hustle. So I became very focused in ministry to the place where I neglected my wife. Now, I'm very thankful for a wonderful wife. My wife is like Jesus. She's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And she's been a big encourager, 58 years together. But I would sometimes take her to church and forget about her till it's time to go home. Sometimes when it's time to go home, I'd say, could you sit and wait in the car a little bit? There's somebody here I need to counsel for a little bit. Or I would be home and let the phone interrupt, or I would take sermon preparation home. And when I was home, I wasn't really home. You're talking to people all day long, you come home exhausted. I just wanted to veg out. I was out of words, you know what I mean? And she wanted to talk. One night, I got a telephone call from my wife saying that she was going to come home late because she got hung up at work. But I answered the house phone so late that the answering machine kicked on and recorded the conversation. I didn't know it. 10 minutes later, saw the red light on. Oh, I got a message. Push, and I had to listen to the conversation between Judy and me. And I couldn't get over the lilt in her voice and the deadness in mine. The conversation went something like, Bob, you having a pretty good day? Okay. Well, what are you doing? Reading newspaper. Well, I just called to tell you we're kind of hung up. I'll be an hour late. Okay. What do you want me to stop and get something on the way home? You want to eat? What do you want to do? Doesn't matter. And I thought to myself, is that what I sound like in my conversation? I just read a book, had a chapter in it. The book was by Bruce Larson. The chapter was, Are You Fun to Live With? I said, I am not fun to live with. If I die, I want Judy to shed at least one tear. You know, I'd like for her to care. And that convicted me. And I began to say, I am going to do better at home. Because the persons who love me the most, I love the most, deserve the best of my energy. I knew if that had been an average couple person from church, I said, oh, I'm having a good day. How's yours going? Well, I'm reading newspaper, reading this article about U of L football. Have you read that? No, don't hurry on the way home now. I don't want you to be here. To my wife, the most important person, I'm saying, yeah, no, grunting. So I said, I'm going to do better. And I decided to learn to shift gears. When I leave church at 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, I say to the Lord, that's the best I can do today. I'm not taking any work home. If I'm behind, I'll get up early tomorrow and I'll catch up. But I'm going to go and give attention to my family and my wife who deserve it. My friend Ben Merrill said he drove a nail in the door between the garage and the house in every place he ever lived. People thought it was to hang a hat. He said that's where I symbolically hung all the junk that happened during the course of the day, so I give attention to my wife. Now, we always had a good marriage, but our marriage began to get better. You know why? Because I started listening. I started laughing and teasing more. I started to give attention. And it just got better and better. Not long after I made that decision, one Sunday night after church, we're in the kitchen of the church, and we were serving pizza to probably 10, 12 teenagers. And I looked across the table at my wife, and she looked particularly attractive to me that night, and I winked at her. She looked away like she was embarrassed. About an hour and a half later, I'm sitting in the easy chair at home, and she comes up behind me and puts her arm around my neck, and she kissed me on the back of the neck. She said, you know what that does to me when you wink at me in public? I said, no, but I found out and I'm going to do it again. Guys, the number one sheep in your flock is your mate and your children. And the best thing we can do for the community and for the church right now is to model marriage for them. Let them see that we love each other. Let them see you holding hands sometimes. I'm telling you, they're watching you like a hawk, how you treat your mate. They're watching to see whether you ever open the car door for her, or whether you're joining her hand, you put your arm around her in church, and how you remark about her in church. And you want to hear them say, you want the women in the church to say to their husband, I want you to love me the way the preacher loves his wife. You be a family's falling apart. I'm telling you, if we'd start in the church modeling family, you couldn't keep I think that people break the door down to get in there. I learned to give attention to my family. And boy, 58 years later, I'm so glad I did. Well, one final lesson. I learned to be content regardless of statistics. This is a lesson most of us know in our heads, but it takes a while to make its way into our hearts. I am a competitive person by nature. I grew up playing ball, and I love to compete even to this day in golf. And I think that's good. Ambition is good. Paul Harvey used to say, it's each tree striving for a place in the sun that makes them all grow tall. But if not controlled, ambition can be the seedbed of discontent, jealousy, compulsive behavior. In the early days of my ministry, my mood during the week was largely determined by what the attendance was or what the response to the invitation was on Sunday. Because there's this encore mentality. It's got to be bigger than last year, bigger than last Sunday. And no matter how good things were, it was never good enough. I tell people all the time, Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky is one of the best churches I've ever seen. 95% of it is wonderful. 4% of it, though, is not so hot. And 1% is nasty. And my problem as a leader, 50% of my focused attention is where? On that 5% to correct it. And I lose the big picture. And I got to learn to step back and say, you know what? People are being saved here. People being edified here. People love this church. People are growing in the Lord. They're learning the Bible. But I lose perspective because I'm focused on that 5% that's wrong. Philippians 4, Paul said, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Contentment is learned behavior. And our church needs to see us at peace. They need to see us content. Now, I cannot point to a dramatic event that impacted me in this area, but over a period of time, I reached the point where it was more about Jesus and less about me, and my life no longer consisted in the abundance of people in the pews. Now, I'll be honest with you, I never lost my zeal for evangelism. I still, to this day, want to reach lost people. I never lost my love for the church, but I did learn to be content regardless of the circumstances. Remember that? You've seen that poster of the Alaskan sled dogs pulling the sleigh, and the picture is taken from the viewpoint of the driver, and all you see is the back of the dogs, and the inscription reads, if you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. Is that you? Are you comparing yourself to other people? And if you're not the lead dog, somebody's getting more attention, somebody's church growing more than yours, somebody's on the platform and you're not, somebody's getting book published and you're not, and all of a sudden you're miserable. Unfair comparisons will destroy you. I put in here, by the way, years ago I wrote a book about Southeast Christian Church. Toward the end of my ministry, it's called When God Builds a Church. And when it came out, it did pretty well in Christian circles, but there's one big problem with that book. At the same time, another guy wrote a book about his church. I can't remember his name, but the name of the book was The Purpose-Driven Church. And one day I saw a headline in USA Today that read, Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church sells 6 million copies. And I thought, 6 million copies? If he got $1 a book, that's $6 million. Our church is just as big. My book's half as good. Lord, I'd take $3 million. I'd be satisfied. Isn't that silly? Isn't that silly? God blessed my ministry far beyond what I could have dreamed or imagined, and yet I'm making myself miserable with unfair comparisons. Let me share with you quickly 5 reasons why you don't get upset about statistics. I believe statistics do matter if you're comparing yourself with what you did last year. Numbers do count, but overemphasis on numbers gets you in trouble. Number 1, everyone hits a plateau on occasion. Don't panic. Jim Collins, I think is in the book Built to Last, talks about mountain climbers stop to build a base camp. And then they'll let the stragglers catch up. They'll send the scouts on ahead. They get their wind, and then they go on. And in any organization, especially a church, there are times you're going to hit a plateau. You use that to build for the next vision. The second reason you don't get upset is numerical growth is mostly beyond your control. There's some things you can control, but there are so many things. Location, harmony of the church, competition of other churches in the area, the culture of your area, the lay leaders, the giftedness of your people, the reputation of your church. You can't control all those things. So you don't blame yourself because your church isn't growing. You might be sowing seed in hard soil. Thirdly, most people you want to impress really don't care. Let's be honest. Who are you trying to impress? There's book of Ecclesiastes, the 4th chapter says there's a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil.